السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome to this live Facebook streaming, and this is our Saturday حلقة. And the topic of today is, as you've seen in the ad, is the about the Great Plague and the what happened at that time in the Muslim land. And so I hope you can hear me because I'm using a new feature here today, which is sharing the screen. So you will not be able to see me, but you will be able to see my presentation, which is more important than seeing me. I hope so. So the Great Plague, as we know, people who grew up here or grew up in Europe, we know that the Great Plague happened in the 13th century in Europe, and that's in year around year sorry in the 14th century, and many people died. They said millions of people died in that plague, and now they call it the Great Plague. They call it the Black Plague, the Black Death, and the estimation is more than 25 million in Europe alone died in that plague. Um, so the question that we're having is, يعني, uh, since that plague happened, what now with coronavirus, we ask ourselves what happened in the Muslim lands. So we know the Great Plague happened. We know that the plague of Amawas, which we spoke about it before at the time of Umar ibn Khattab, but when you go back and read in the books of history, you'll find that many plagues happen in the Muslim land. And يعني subhanallah, you find we don't know about it because it's usually in the books of history. And the ulama did not speak about it that much. There are many books, but you find it, for example, in Zad al-Ma'ad for Ibn Qayyim. He mentioned it and mentioned the ahkam of the plague, but the books that are only for the plagues are not that many. And the famous one was written by Imam Ibn Hajar. So let's go quickly through our Islamic history to know the history of the plagues in the Muslim world. Um, we know the Ta'un Amwas that happened in the year 18th of the Hijrah. And the estimated number of people died at 25,000. Can you imagine that number? At that time, this is a very big number. And from my reading in history, usually people who die as a result of plague or pandemic or epidemic are way more than people who die in wars. So here, like that's way more than 25,000, more than any number of people died in previous battle that the Muslim went through. Then after that, they called the plague of Al-Jarif, and it happened in the Iraq, and that year 69 of Al-Hijrah and 688 in the Gregorian calendar. And famous scholars died of a very famous scholar, the Arabic grammar called Abu al-Aswad al-Du'ali. He died in that plague, and reported that Anas ibn Malik, the Sahabi radiallahu anh, uh, he lost 70 of his children and his grandchildren and grandchildren in that plague. Now, one person, he lost 70 persons from his family. Um, then Ta'un Muslim ibn Qutayba, plague of Muslim ibn Qutayba. They name it after the person which was the ruler at that time, also in Basra in Iraq. And they said the number of death reached 1,000 per day. And so all these during the Umayyad time, many plagues happened at that time. Then there's many plagues happen in the year 423. That's the 5th century of Al-Hijrah. And they say many plagues happened during that time. You find it mentioned in the books. In Iraq, in Iran, it was like all over. They said reached Azerbaijan, which is the country right now there, Bukhara. So all these countries, that plague reached them. And it reached Egypt, and Ibn Hajar spoke about it. It reached Andalus, which is Spain now, but it was a huge plague. But my topic now is I'm concentrating on this called the Great Plague or the Black Death, because we know it happened in Europe, and many people died in Europe at that time. يعني 25 million. But the question is, did it also happen in the Islamic world? Yes, it did. And that was in the year, around the year 749 to 750, and it was also all over in the Muslim world. It's in the Sham area, Syria, Palestine, in Egypt, in Morocco, in Tunisia, in Andalus, and Ibn Hajar, who wrote about it like 90 years after that, he did not witness it. But Ibn Hajar himself, he witnessed other plagues at his time, and then he wrote his book, and then he mentioned what the ulama said about that great plague. And Ibn Hajar said, وَلَمْ يَقَعْ فِي الدُّنْيَا طَاعُونٌ أَعْظَمْ مِنْ. There never happened in this earth, huh, a plague that's worse than the one that happened in the 8th century. 8th century of the Hijri was equivalent to the 14th century in the Gregorian calendar. And he said that it would started before year 749, and it took 1 year. SubhanAllah, in the Muslim world, it took 1 year, but in Europe, it took around 4 or 5 years. But Ibn Hajar, he said, like, they used to divide the world into 7 regions. All regions on the whole world were affected by this plague. And he said even Mecca, even some villages between Mecca and Yemen. He said the only place that was not affected by this plague was Medina. And before Ibn Hajar, let's look at the ulama who lived during the time of that plague. One of the famous ulama who lived at that time, he lives in Halab in Syria, and he witnessed the plague. And later he died of the plague. He's called Ibn al-Wardi. Al-Wardi is a famous, in Arabic it's called Nahawi, Adib, and he writes literature and Arabic grammar, and he's faqih in fiqh shafi'i, and he has some very famous poets. اعتزل ذكر الغواني والغزل in very famous poetry in Arabic. And so Ibn al-Wardi wrote a very nice they call it in Arabic risala, a small book. And so in that he said, let me just quote from it here. Hopefully you can see it visible. So he started by describing that plague, and he said that يا له من زائر من سنة 15 دائر. He said this plague continued for 15 years, even though in his city, in his town, it was about 1 year. But they knew that it was everywhere. And he said, ما صين عنه الصين ولا منع منه حصن حصين. He said, it's like even it started in China and in India and in land of Hind and Sind, they call it in Arabic, which is all this land of the subcontinent of India, and Uzbekistan. And he's just describing, he said, Ajam and Arab. And he said he reached the land of the Romans, and he reached Cyprus, Algeria, and Al-Qahira, Cairo, and Alexandria, and went down to the south of Egypt called Sa'id. And and he said he went to Lebanon, Beirut, all these countries, and that plague, that in his book here, and Shazer, Iran, Halab, where he lived, and it reached everywhere. Other famous scholar who witnessed that plague was the famous scholar Ibn Khaldun. And Ibn Khaldun lived at that time, and also he was very famous. If you know, he has this book called Al Muqaddimah. He's a social scientist. He's the father of social science. And in his book, he mentioned the plague because he witnessed the plague, and at that time he was in Tunisia. And he wrote like very sadly about it. He said, he killed all the people of my generation, and he lost his parents, both his parents. He lost them in the plague. And why we're saying this? Why we're mentioning the plague? Why we're saying what ulama يعني كده? Because when we face something now, we need to know what happened in the history, and how did people deal with it? What was the extent of it? So other alim there who wrote about that plague, there's things that is very interesting because at that time they didn't know about this concept of bacteria and contagious diseases. So some of the ulama, they did not believe that something is contagious, and they said the doctors told us it's contagious, but we see a person who's serving his family, and you have one or two persons in his family die of the plague, and that person, nothing happened to him. And you see another person who the whole family, like they're all healthy, and suddenly one of them gets sick. So this idea of like transmission of the diseases, they didn't get it very well. Even though the Muslim doctors, they got it. It seems, even from the quotation of those ulama, the doctors told them this. There is a very famous doctor and also a alim in Andalus called Ibn al-Khatib. Ibn al-Khatib, he wrote a book during that time of the plague. He called it مقنعات السائل عن المرض الهائل. And the book is called The Answering of the Convincing the Person Who's Asking about the great disease. And he in his book, he wrote about how disease can be contagious, and he like criticized those ulama who said there's nothing contagious, and he told them you might be a reason for some people getting died because of this. He wrote a very nice book. And I noticed also great ulama mention other books. Now we know the great ulama. We know Ibn Hajar, we know Ibn Khaldun, we know Ibn al-Qayyim, we know Ibn Taymiyyah, we know al-Ghazali, we know these people. But there are in the Muslim world, there are many ulama who are not at the same caliber of those that we know. And they wrote books, and these books are not published yet. It's still manuscript somewhere. But you can tell, like Ibn Hajar, when he wrote his book about the plague, he mentioned many other books, and these books, when you look for them, you don't find them. But he quote other people. Ibn al-Qayyim, when he wrote about it, about the plague, I liked his methodology because he quoted what doctors said, and he said doctor said this and this and this. So Ibn al-Qayyim believed what the doctor said, not like other people. Like Ibn al-Wardi didn't believe that, even though he wrote a book about the plague, he died of the plague, but he didn't believe that how come it's contagious. And it said everything is just from Allah, and that's it. But Ibn al-Qayyim answered that. He said, yes, everything is from Allah, but Allah is the one who created the disease. Allah who created the causality of what happened. This is all creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also in some plagues, in some cities, they said people couldn't even establish Jum'ah. And it's not like us right now, we're doing this as a precaution. But at that time, it's just because they couldn't go to the masjid because of sickness, because of people who were dying. And then Ibn what do you call it? Ibn al-Wardi in his book, and he wrote. He said, okay, that's plague also. It reminded us, and one of the benefits when you read these books, that one of the benefits is reminded us of the death, and reminded us that we don't have great hope in this life, a hope that you're living for a long time and you forget about death. And it's reminded us of going back to Allah and doing amal salih. Ibn Hajar said at his time in Egypt, and before that, he quoted someone else mentioned the plague in Syria. He said people did something very strange, and Ibn Hajar told them not to do it. He said they equate the plague. You know, we have a prayer called prayer Salatul Istisqa, which you pray for the rain, and and when you pray for the rain, the whole city will go out and yani ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for rain. So some people have said, okay, let's do like this at the time of the plague, and let's all go out, men, women, children, go outside the city, and we pray and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to relieve this from us. So they went. But the ulama who recorded this, they said after that prayer, when people came back, the rate of death increased substantially. And now we understand why. Because of the disease being contagious. When people go like this in big gatherings, they transmit the disease to each others. That's why now doctors telling people don't gather like in large numbers, so you don't transmit the disease to other people. And that's exactly what happened. Ibn Hajar reported at his time, he said people in Cairo used to die like around 40 or less per day. He said after that prayer, that number started to increase, and after 1 month, the people who die in Cairo, the level reached 1,000 per day. Can you imagine 1,000 per day? And at that time, Cairo was not populated as now. There's no 100 million in Cairo. Maybe a few millions, yes. But when you started losing 1,000 per day, that's a very, very huge number. And the as I said here, just the quotation from Ibn al-Wardi, and he said, يعني one of the benefits of the ta'un is that يعني you go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you wake up. اليقظة من الغفلة. You wake up from يعني being sleep, and you start carrying things or doing things that help you in your journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yani that the disease that is going now, the coronavirus, is a reminder for us to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to remind us of death. And we don't hope, yani, when you see people dying, now when we live, we go, okay, we'll die later on. We'll die like 30 years maybe from now, 40 years from now, whatever. But when you see people are dying from diseases, then you remember the reality of life, and you remember that life is very short, and at the end we're going to die, and we are going to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we don't forget this fact of life, this certainty that we are all going to die, either by this disease or by something else. But we hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Sallallahu al-afiyah, you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for health, for good health. You don't wish that you die of diseases. You do your best, yani, to stay healthy, and to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يعفو عنا وعنكم. اللهم إنا نسألك العفو والعافية في الدين والدنيا والآخرة. وجزاكم الله خيرا. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.